Hi, I'm Kylie. My stories mix romance with danger. This story is about a stranger who shatters every belief. Comment Spotify if you want the audiobook. Let's begin. Amelia never imagined her worldview could be shaken. For her, love had clear parameters and background was a non-negotiable line. It wasn't malice, she assured herself. It was tradition, the comfortable order of things as she understood them. Love was meant to be straightforward, predictable, existing within the neat borders society had drawn long ago. But life has a habit of disregarding the rules we cling to. This is how every conviction she held fractured in one irreversible instant, a story of how walls, constructed over a lifetime of ingrained bias, can collapse without warning. It began on an ordinary, brisk evening in early March. The streets of Boston were alive with the gentle chaos of a Friday night, the air buzzing with the approach of weekend promise. Couples walked arm in arm, their laughter weaving through the sounds of the city. For Amelia, love was a curated concept, a distant theory, until she encountered the one person she believed she was fundamentally incapable of loving. This is that story, the moment everything changed. The bookstore café, the final chapter, was a cozy pocket of warmth against the chilly evening outside. The rich scent of old paper and dark roast coffee blended in the air, underscored by the soft melody of a piano piece streaming from hidden speakers. The space was dotted with people, students with laptops, friends catching up, and pairs lost in quiet conversation. At a corner table by the philosophy section, Amelia stirred her chai latte, her gaze drifting across the room. She wasn't alone. Her closest friend, Chloe, sat opposite her, flipping through a magazine between sips of an espresso. This cafe was their usual spot, a weekly ritual they'd maintained since college. Tonight, however, Amelia was distracted. Her attention settled on a couple 2 tables over. She nudged Chloe's elbow. "Look at them," she murmured, a slight tilt of her chin indicating the direction. Chloe glanced up briefly, her eyes scanning the room before landing on the pair.
Who?
The students with the huge textbooks.
No.
Them. Amelia whispered, her voice low and tight. A young Asian woman with a bright smile was seated across from a black man, both leaning in, their hands nearly touching on the wooden table as they shared a quiet joke. Amelia's lips thinned into a line of disapproval. "I just don't get it. Some things are meant to mix. It's confusing." Chloe set her magazine down with a soft thud, her brow furrowing. "Amy, come on. What is that supposed to mean? They look happy." Amelia leaned back in her wrought iron chair, crossing her arms defensively over her chest. "I'm just stating a fact. People have their own circles, their own wavelengths. It's about natural compatibility, shared experiences." Chloe exhaled, a long, tired sound that spoke of repeated conversations. "It's 2025. Are you actually serious right now? They're just 2 people having coffee." "I'm not prejudiced," Amelia said quickly, lifting her cup as if to hide behind it. The warmth did nothing to soothe the cold certainty in her gut. "I just think things have an order, a social harmony. That," she said, nodding subtly toward the couple again, "disrupts it. It doesn't make sense." Chloe shook her head, her expression shifting from annoyance to something closer to disappointment. "Do you listen to yourself? You sound exactly like the people who say, 'I'm not racist, but,' and then finish with something awful." "I don't dislike anyone, Chloe," Amelia interrupted, her voice edged with a frustration she couldn't fully explain. "I just believe in cultural cohesion. That's how it's always been. That's what works." Chloe watched her, silent for a beat that stretched too long. "And why do you believe that? Who told you that works?" Amelia didn't answer immediately. The question, so simple, lodged in her mind like a splinter. She never had to examine it. It was simply the truth, absorbed from a childhood in a homogeneous Connecticut suburb, from family gatherings where certain topics were met with knowing glances and changed subjects. It was the water she'd swum in, never questioning its temperature. The weight of the unspoken hung heavily between them. Chloe eventually returned to her magazine, shaking her head slightly as she turned a page with more force than necessary. But Amelia's eyes remained fixed on the couple. The woman laughed, a sound of pure delight, tossing her dark hair back as the man reached forward to gently tuck a stray strand behind her ear. His touch was tender, familiar. A pang, sharp and unexpected, hit Amelia's chest. She didn't realize she was staring, her scrutiny blatant, until the man's eyes briefly lifted and met hers. Marcus. She didn't know his name yet, but within weeks, he would unravel every certainty she possessed. The cafe door swung open with a jingle of bells, a gust of cold city air slicing through the warmth. A few people glanced toward the entrance, but Amelia paid no mind until she heard Chloe's sharp, quiet intake of breath. She looked up just as he stepped inside. Tall, with an easy confidence that seemed to fill the space around him, his shoulders broad under a tailored charcoal wool coat. He had a strong, thoughtful face, and his dark eyes scanned the room with a calm assurance, as if he owned his space in any world. He wasn't loud or seeking attention, yet the atmosphere seemed to subtly adjust around him, a quiet deference in the way people subtly made room. Amelia tensed, her fingers tightening around her mug. "Great, another one," she muttered, the words slipping out just loud enough for Chloe to hear. Chloe turned to her, eyes wide with a mix of shock and embarrassment. "Amy, for God's sake. You're being ridiculous. And you're being rude." Amelia rolled her eyes, a practiced gesture of dismissal, and picked up her latte, pretending deep interest in the foam art. But she was interested, not with the flutter of attraction she saw in others' eyes, but with a churning, defensive discomfort that tightened her stomach into a knot. She resented the feeling, this involuntary alertness his presence triggered. Marcus walked past their table, his stride unhurried. He was oblivious to the pointed glare she shot toward his back. He approached the counter where the barista, a guy named Leo with friendly eyes and intricate sleeve tattoos, brightened in recognition. "Hey, Marcus. Late today. The usual? Americano. Room for cream? You know me too well, Leo. Thanks." His voice was a warm, low baritone. Chloe smirked, leaning toward Amelia, her voice a teasing whisper. "Looks like he's a regular. A pillar of the community. Guess you'll have to get used to seeing him." Amelia scoffed, stirring her latte so aggressively, she sloshed some over the rim. "Wonderful. Just what I needed." As fate, or perhaps simple routine, would have it, his order was placed for pickup on the counter right beside their table. He stepped over, reaching for his to-go cup just as Amelia shifted her leather tote bag from the floor to her lap. His arm brushed lightly against her shoulder. "Pardon me," he said, glancing down at her. His voice was smooth, polite, devoid of any irritation. She barely looked at him, offering a curt nod toward her bag as if it were the offender. "It's fine." Marcus paused for a fraction of a second, his eyes flickering to hers, reading something in her averted gaze. He simply nodded again, a small, neutral motion, and walked away, showing no sign of offense or further engagement. Chloe gaped, setting her espresso cup down with a clatter.
Wow.
"You're actually unbelievable." He was being perfectly nice. Amelia shrugged, a facade of nonchalance she didn't feel. "I don't care." But that was a lie. She hated the frantic, hammering rhythm of her heart that had started the moment he neared, the quickened pulse that lingered after the brief contact. It was an ugly, foreign sensation. She told herself it was disdain, a righteous disapproval of his intrusion into her space. But a quieter, more honest part, buried deep, whispered it was fear. Fear of the unknown, of a challenge to her controlled, orderly world where everything and everyone had an assigned place. The universe, it seemed, was just getting started. It began happening with a frequency that unsettled her to her core. At first, she dismissed it as the predictable overlap of urban life. Boston was a big city, but the Back Bay neighborhood where she lived and worked could feel like a small town. Yet as the crisp days of March bled into the rainy bloom of April, she kept seeing him. Not just glimpses, but sustained presences. At her early morning spin class downtown, he was on a stationary bike 2 rows over, immersed in his workout. In the organic produce aisle of the Whole Foods on Dartmouth Street, he was comparing sweet potatoes. One rainy Saturday, browsing the historical biography section at the Boston Public Library, she turned a corner and there he was, intently reading the jacket copy of a massive hardcover. Coincidence began to feel like a deliberate, persistent nudge. It was as if some unseen force was meticulously placing him in her path, forcing her to look, to acknowledge, to see beyond the simple category she'd so hastily filed him under. She resisted the implication fiercely. She averted her eyes when she felt the potential weight of his gaze across a room, ignored the peculiar, inconvenient pang in her chest when she saw him laugh with Leo the barista. Never at her, of course. Her coldness at the café had likely ensured she was invisible to him, a blip of incivility in his day. She told herself she preferred it that way. The grocery store encounter unsettled her most deeply. It was a Tuesday evening, the store hushed and half empty. She was in the tea aisle, methodically searching for her favorite peppermint blend, when she sensed someone step into the aisle beside her. She knew, with a sudden, sinking certainty, without even looking. A moment of silence passed, filled only with the hum of the freezer cases. Then his voice, familiar now. "We have to stop meeting like this." Marcus's voice held the same relaxed, slightly amused tone it had in the cafe, as if commenting on the weather. Amelia stiffened, her shoulders tensing. She didn't turn, focusing with exaggerated intensity on the boxes of chamomile. "Guess so," she muttered, finally spotting her peppermint tea on the top shelf. She stretched, grabbing the last box just as his hand reached for the same one. Her fingers closed around the cardboard corner a heartbeat before his. She pulled it down, clutching it to her chest like a prize. He smirked, withdrawing his hand empty. "Don't worry. I won't fight you for it. Peace over peppermint." She expected irritation, sarcasm, a roll of the eyes. His tone held neither, just a light, genuine humor that disarmed her prepared defensiveness. When she finally, reluctantly, risked a glance at his face, what she saw in his eyes stopped her breath. Patience. And something worse, amusement, as if her petty victory was charming. It unnerved her more than any anger would have. Marcus took a deliberate step back, physically giving her space in the narrow aisle. Then, without a second thought or a hint of resentment, he selected a different brand of ginger tea from a lower shelf. No frustrated sigh, no muttered comment, no confrontation. Just simple, unasked for kindness and an easy capitulation. For the first time, Amelia noticed something else, something that had nothing to do with the color of his skin or her preconceptions. His presence was steady, grounded. Not arrogant or imposing, but resilient, self-possessed. It was the air of someone who had, at some point in his life, learned the profound skill of moving through spaces that weren't always designed with him in mind, of disarming tension without engaging in battle. That realization lodged uncomfortably in her throat, a hard lump of shame. She had spent so long defining people by the surface, by the difference, that she'd never paused to consider the life etched behind it, the experiences that shaped such grace under pressure. The way he carried himself wasn't just confidence, it was forged history. She hated the way her mind clung to that thought, the way her breath hitched as he gave her a polite, almost imperceptible nod and walked away, his basket swinging gently. He left her standing alone in the brightly lit aisle, holding her box of tea like a fragile, meaningless shield. She tried to dismiss it all the way home. It was nothing, a polite stranger. But the high, rigid walls she had built so carefully around her beliefs, bricks of tradition and fear, no longer felt impregnable. A hairline crack had appeared, and a dreadful, curious light was seeping in. The city had grown quiet. The usual relentless hum of Boston faded into a cold, late-night stillness broken only by the distant wail of a siren. Amelia stood alone on the underground platform for the Green Line at Copley Station, arms wrapped tightly around herself under her thin spring coat. She regretted not wearing something heavier. The fluorescent light above flickered erratically, painting the empty, gray-tiled platform in jagged, moving shadows. She checked her phone for the 10th time, The next train was still 12 minutes away. A discarded newspaper skittered across the tracks with a ghostly rustle. The station was deserted except for the distant echo of traffic from Boylston Street above. She exhaled, her breath a faint white cloud in the damp, underground air, trying to ignore the creeping sense of vulnerability that tightened her scalp. Then footsteps, heavy, deliberate, echoing off the tiled walls with a menacing cadence. A group of men, 3 of them, descended the stairs at the far end of the platform, their laughter loud, abrasive, and fueled by something that smelled like cheap beer from 20 feet away. She stiffened, focusing intently on her phone screen, pretending absorption in a meaningless app. Their conversation, laced with crude remarks and aggressive banter, grew louder as they ambled closer. One of them detached from the group, his footsteps veering toward her. He was too close, invading the bubble of personal space she desperately clung to. "Hey there." His voice was a gravelly sneer. "Little late for a pretty thing to be out all alone, isn't it? T-station's no place for a princess." Amelia's grip on her phone turned her knuckles bone-white. She kept her eyes locked on the glowing screen, her heart a frantic bird against her ribs. "Don't engage, don't look, be invisible." "What, no smile?" Another jeered, moving to flank her on the other side, trapping her against the platform edge. "Don't be like that. We're just being friendly." The third man hung back, watching with a leer. The smell of stale alcohol and sweat intensified. Her mouth went dry. She willed the train to appear, to roar into the station with its saving grace of light and noise, but the tracks remained dark, silent, and endless. "Come on, sweetheart, be friendly," the first one said, leaning in so close she could see the broken capillaries in his nose. "We'll keep you company till your train comes." A spike of pure, undiluted fear shot through her veins. She opened her mouth, a feeble "leave me alone" forming, but before any sound could escape her paralyzed throat, another voice cut through the thick, toxic tension. It was calm, steady, and absolute. "She's not interested. Move along." The laughter died instantly, snuffed out. The group turned as one. Marcus stood near the stairwell, hands tucked casually into the pockets of his jacket, his expression neutral, but his posture unyielding. He wasn't looking at her. His gaze was fixed on the men, steady and unblinking. A beat of thick, electric silence passed, broken only by the drip of water from a pipe somewhere. Then the leader, the one who had spoken first, scoffed, puffing out his chest. "And who's asking? This your girlfriend, man?" "Someone who can see she wants to be left alone," Marcus replied. His voice held no aggression, no bluster, no rise in volume. It was a simple, incontestable statement of fact, delivered with a quiet authority that filled the space more effectively than any shout. The men exchanged glances, a silent communication of recalculation. They muttered obscenities under their breath, their bravado visibly deflating. After a tense moment that stretched Amelia's nerves to breaking point, the leader shrugged with feigned, wounded nonchalance. "Whatever, man. Not worth the hassle. She ain't all that anyway." They shuffled back toward the stairs, their earlier swagger diminished to a slouch, and disappeared into the gloom above. Amelia released a shuddering breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. A tremor started in her hands and traveled up her arms. She felt weak, unsteady. Marcus turned to her, his features softening from their steely neutrality. "You all right?" he asked, his voice now gentler, but still carrying that same grounded calm. She swallowed hard, the motion painful in her dry throat. She managed a nod.
"Yes."
"I just thank you." The words felt pathetic, inadequate, suffocated by the crushing, hot wave of shame that washed over her immediately after the fear receded. The man offering protection without a second thought, without any expectation, was the same man she had dismissed with a glare. The same man she had belittled in her private thoughts, reducing him to a symbol of disruption. The same man she had looked upon with a quiet, unexamined disdain, as if he were somehow less than. She had built her entire life on the unshakable premise that people like him were separate, other, not part of the fabric of her world, not her responsibility, not her concern. Yet in her moment of raw, primal fear, when she was utterly alone, it wasn't someone from her insulated world, someone who looked like her uncle or her college boyfriend, who stepped forward. It was him, Marcus. The line she had sworn was real, tangible, and important had vanished when it mattered most. It had simply ceased to exist. She looked at him, truly looked, and for the first time, the lens of prejudice, the filter she hadn't even known she was wearing, fell away. She just saw a good person, a strong, decent man who had intervened when others would have looked away. Marcus, she began, her voice thick with emotion she couldn't name, gratitude, shame, profound confusion. He shook his head, offering a small, understanding smile that held no trace of "I told you so." "Don't mention it." "Really?" Then, as calmly and quietly as he had arrived, he turned and walked toward the opposite bench, sitting down and pulling out his phone, giving her the space and privacy to collect herself. She watched him, her mind reeling, the world tilting on its axis. And for the first time in her 28 years, Amelia wasn't sure of anything at all. Every axiom, every truth she'd been fed, every comfortable assumption, crumbled into dust in the cold, dank air of the tea station. The bookstore cafe felt different now. Perhaps it was the soft, hopeful afternoon light of May filtering through the high, arched windows, painting the worn wooden floors in golden stripes. Or perhaps it was just her. She was the one who had changed. She sat at their usual corner table, a cup of chamomile tea cooling before her, its steam carrying a faint, floral scent. The same comforting smells of paper and coffee, the same low murmur of conversations and clinking cups, the same piano jazz. But she was not the same woman who had sat here months before, making quiet, cruel remarks from a place of unearned certainty. And now, that man sat across from her. Marcus. She'd sent the text after 3 days of agonizing deliberation, her fingers clumsy with nerves. Asterisk. "Hi, this is Amelia from the cafe and the tea station. Would you be willing to meet me for coffee? I owe you a proper thank you." Asterisk. She'd half convinced herself he would ignore it or politely decline. But his reply had been simple and swift. Asterisk. "Sure. Final chapter. Tomorrow at 4. Asterisk. And now here he was. He sat with an easy, relaxed posture, stirring a black coffee as if this were any ordinary, casual meeting between acquaintances. Amelia drew a shaky breath, her eyes fixed on the swirling pattern in her ceramic mug. "I used to think," she started, then faltered, the rehearsed lines evaporating. She'd practiced this in the mirror, in the shower, on her walk over. But now that she was here, the words felt clumsy, weighted with an ocean of regret. Marcus waited, silent, giving her the room to find them. His patience, she was beginning to understand, was not passivity. It was a profound form of strength. She forced herself to lift her gaze and meet his. His eyes were watchful, kind, but gave nothing away. "I used to believe in things that were wrong, deeply wrong, and I treated you. I thought things." She took another breath, pushing through. "I am so sorry. For how I acted. For what I thought." The apology hung in the air between them, fragile and raw, a bridge made of glass. Marcus studied her for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. Then he set his spoon down on the saucer with a soft clink. Instead of the judgment, the anger, or the dismissive acceptance she had braced for, a gentle, almost sad smile touched his lips. "Fear is a habit," he said quietly, his words measured. "A comfortable one. It's easy to stick with what you know, even when what you know is hurtful. But understanding, is seeing someone as a person, that's a choice. A harder one." She blinked, disarmed. She had come ready for a transaction, an apology exchanged for absolution or rejection. She wasn't prepared for philosophy, for grace. "Do you really believe that? That it's a choice anyone can make?" "I have to believe it," he replied, his gaze steady on hers. "Otherwise, what's the point of any of it? We'd all just be habits walking around in skin." She nodded slowly, his words seeping into the cracked foundations of her old self, finding purchase. She thought of the cold platform, the paralyzing fear, the overwhelming shame that followed like a shadow. The invisible, impermeable line she had sworn existed between their worlds had vanished in an instant when her safety was on the line. Sitting here now, in the gentle hum of the café, she wondered with a devastating clarity if that line had ever been real at all, or if it was just a story she'd been told, a fence she'd built herself, and then mistaken for a fortress wall. She took a sip of her tea, the warmth a small comfort in her swirling emotions. "You know," she said after a pause, her voice quieter, more reflective, "I used to think people like me, we were just products of our upbringing. That we couldn't really change. That the mold was set." Marcus tilted his head slightly, a gesture of genuine curiosity. "And now?" Amelia exhaled, a long, slow release of air. And then, for the first time in this conversation, a faint, genuine smile lifted the corners of her mouth, tentative but real. "Now I think maybe the mold is just clay, and we get to decide what shape it takes." His smile deepened then, reaching his eyes, transforming his face into one of open warmth. And in that moment, she didn't see a black man sitting across from a white woman in a cafe. She saw Marcus, a person with a history, with patience, with a quiet courage she was only beginning to comprehend. A friend, and perhaps, in time, the delicate, terrifying, beautiful possibility of something more. The cafe buzzed softly around them. The grind of the espresso machine, the chatter of a book club gathering in the corner, the rustle of pages turning. But Amelia barely noticed. The immense, invisible weight she had carried for so long. The weight of silent judgments, of inherited biases, of a world neatly and fearfully divided, felt lighter. It hadn't vanished, but she had set it down. For the first time in a long time, she was simply present. Here.
Now.
Not every love story begins with love. Some start in the deep, stubborn shadows of prejudice, in the silence of unchallenged beliefs, in the heavy, inherited weight of lessons learned without question. Some begin with ignorance, with coldness, with fear. But they can also begin with the quiet, staggering courage to change, to look into the mirror of your own soul and not flinch from the reflection. Amelia never thought she would question her own foundation. She never imagined she would look at someone she'd once dismissed as a symbol and see a complex, beautiful human being. She never dreamed she'd see a future. But change doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't announce its arrival with fanfare. It arrives in the quiet moments after a crisis, in the echo of a kind word, in the form of a stranger who meets hostility not with reciprocal hate, but with an unshakable, graceful humanity. Marcus never tried to change her. He never lectured, never demanded penance or performative guilt. He simply existed, moving through the world with a patience and quiet strength that was its own testament. And in doing so, he had held up a mirror, not to her face, but to her soul. The hardest part, she was realizing, wasn't the acute shame of admitting she was wrong. It was the ongoing, daily responsibility of realizing she had the power, the choice, to walk a different path, to consciously unlearn, to deliberately see anew. Maybe love was never about boundaries or staying in prescribed lanes. Maybe it wasn't about background or heritage or the color of skin at all. Maybe love was the daily, conscious choice to recognize the full, flawed, magnificent humanity in another person. Maybe it was about letting go of the fear that masqueraded as principle. As she sat in that cafe, the late afternoon sun warming her back, across from a man she had once seen only as different, Amelia understood that change wasn't a single, cinematic event. It wasn't a dramatic, tear-filled conversion. It was a series of small, deliberate choices. It was the tiny, almost imperceptible shifts in perspective when you pass someone on the street. It was the quiet unraveling of a lifetime of assumptions, one thread at a time. She didn't know what the future held, for her, for them, for the world. The path ahead was unfamiliar and daunting. But for the first time, she was willing to find out. She was willing to walk it without the old, heavy map, And maybe, just maybe, that willingness, that open, trembling hope, was enough.